Abba, are you still davening?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's taking you like an hour and a half to daven mincha.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're just avoiding homeschooling.
Hey everyone, Shlomo Brody here. Today we're going to review how we can speed up communal davening in the time of Corona. Now in general, we wouldn't normally do this, but there are a couple of reasons why we want to make davening a bit faster today without compromising, of course, on halakha or from being spiritually meaningful. One is that when we're davening outdoors, it could be that there's bad weather, it's too hot, rain is threatening, and there's an interest in getting to the end faster. And secondly, when people are wearing masks and in general there's a risk of being together, it pays to try to speed things up a bit. Let's start with Mincha and Ma'ariv. During this time period, many people are trying to have Mincha and Ma'ariv around the same time, so that way people don't have to congregate twice during the course of the afternoon and evening. In many places around the world, this is done around Shkia, with the thought being that Shkia is the end of the day and the beginning of the night. Even though it's a bit problematic halakhically, because Shkia also marks the beginning of the period of Ben Ishmashot, a period of doubt, which is why here in Israel, many people are careful to wait at least 20 minutes after Shkia to daven Ma'ariv. But it's certainly an acceptable position around the world, and in Israel sometimes it's done, although some people will treat you, if you suggest that, as if you're suggesting to eat pork in Yom Kippur. Some people are really crazy about it. And therefore, a better solution in some communities might be to do around the time of Plag Mincha. This was actually the time in the Gemara where Rabbi Yehuda said is the end of the afternoon period and the beginning of the evening services. And the Gemara doesn't resolve that dispute between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. And the Shulchan Aruch rules, following many Rishonim, that a person can utilize either the times of the Chachamim or of Rabbi Yehuda. And certainly in the time period of Shat Chak, people can rely on the position of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore daven a little bit earlier in the afternoon. This might also be an advantage in places in the summertime where Shkia is very late, and it's to the advantage to be able to daven Mincha and Ma'ariv at an earlier time period. Last year is in Manchester, Shkia there is very, very late in the summer times, and it might be advantageous in many countries, in many places, to be able to daven a bit earlier. Now when it comes to Mincha, it pays to shorten the entire service by doing what's known as halakhic kedusha, by combining the Chazan's repetition alongside with the silent Shemona Esrei. There are two different ways of doing this. According to the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan, the Chazan says the first three brachot along with Kedusha out loud initially, and then the tzibur begins their silent Shemona Esrei afterwards. According to the Kaf HaChaim and Rav Soloveitchik, position I personally prefer, the tzibur should actually recite silently the Shemona Esrei as the Chazan begins. They say the key parts of Kedusha together, and then they go on as Chazan and tzibur together and say silent Shemona Esrei until the end. Throughout the year, this is a viable option when you have a very small minyan and you're not sure that everyone will respond to the Chazarat HaShatz and say Amen, or if time is short. And this is certainly a situation of Shat Chak, and therefore in order to minimize the time of Mincha, you can certainly employ this strategy. Now, there are a couple ways to shorten Shacharit. First of all, there's Psukei d'Zimra. Psukei d'Zimra is an important part of the Tefillah. It's meant to prepare us for the heart of the Tefillah later on, to set the proper mode by praising God, creating a certain environment of happiness, of Tefillah. But this doesn't have to be done as a tzibur, as a group together. It can be done with people in their homes, with or without their tefillin on. Then people can meet together in their shul or wherever they're meeting and put their tefillin on there.
And then start from Yishtabach.
Unfortunately, that means that we'll be skipping the early mourners Kaddish at the beginning of Psukei d'Zimra, but there'll be a mourners Kaddish at the later part for the mourners Avelim to recite. One can also employ halakhic kedusha during Shacharit as well. We do it less frequently, partly because we usually don't have the time pressure of Shkia coming up like we do with Mincha. But if you look in Shulchan Aruch, this is certainly a viable option in time of Shat Chak. It comes up in situations when there are workers that have to go to work. It comes up in the army a lot. How do you do it? In this situation, I think everyone would agree that it's preferable for everyone to recite silently Shemona Esrei alongside with the Chazan. After Kedusha, everyone continues on with their silent Shemona Esrei. In Chutz La'aretz, this goes all the way to the end of Tefillah. In Eretz Yisrael, if there's Birkat Kohanim, the Chazan picks up again from Ritzei out loud, saying aloud his last three brachot, including Birkat Kohanim, followed by Sim Shalom. Another area we can shorten during Shacharit is Tachanun. Now, Tachanun is a very important tefillah in general where we supplicate to God, and it's particularly important in a time period like our own of an Eight Sarah. But that said, this is one of those areas which can be shortened, because if you look in the Torah, he quotes from the Gaon that says that this is actually a reshut. This is not an obligation. In fact, the whole point of Tachanun is that it's meant to be a deeply felt personal supplication. And if time is really short, one can skip some of the parts of Tachanun, or Mondays and Thursdays, not do the extended parts, or just say one of the parts, or just say what the regular Tachanun is, whatever it might be. But Tachanun has a certain amount of flexibility to shorten it in order to speed up to get towards the end of Tefillah. The last area to shorten has to do with Kaddish at the end of davening. Now, historically, in many communities, only one mourner would say Kaddish each time, and therefore Kaddishes were added after the Shir Shel Yom, after other things, in order to increase the number of Kaddish opportunities that one could say during the course of the day. In 1831, Rabbi Akiva Eger, following the precedent from some Sephardic communities and other scholars before him, suggested that during a cholera pandemic, in which there were many mourners in the community, that there weren't enough Kaddishes to go around, and therefore he suggested that all the Avelim should say Kaddish together. This has become the practice in most communities around the world, but for whatever reason, some communities still maintain saying multiple Kaddishes towards the end of davening. As the Aruch HaShulchan and others have noticed, this riboy Kaddishim, this increased number of Kaddishes, doesn't really make much sense to keep on saying over and over the same words. You should sanctify the name of God once, right after Aleinu, and afterwards it's really not necessary. It doesn't make much sense, in fact, to keep on saying Kaddish. Obviously, this could be sensitive in some communities, particularly where mourners haven't been able to say Kaddish over the past few months. But there's really no need to increase too many Kaddishes towards the end. Right after Aleinu is really the only one that's necessary. In communities like in Israel, where we also say Pitum Bektoret, they can also say Kaddish Rabbanan afterwards, and that's all the Kaddishes that are necessary. All of these are really meant to help us in a time period of Shat HaDechak, and in each community, rabbis can advise which solutions might be most appropriate for the community. But I hope you'll find this beneficial, that we can find a way to keep davening short while still fully halakhic and spiritually meaningful.